I assume you might have watched Chernobyl TV series, which is very popular these days. But not many people know the true story behind the Chernobyl disaster. Chernobyl was a nuclear power plant that supplied about 10% of the total electricity requirement of Soviet Russia. It exploded on April 26, 1986. It is considered the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the world. Initially, 2 employees perished in the explosion, and this was only the beginning, which ended with a mountain of dead bodies. Today, this whole region is without human life. It is believed that the radiation effects will last for another 1,000 years to come. Today, we will try to clearly understand what happened inside the Chernobyl power station. Chernobyl was an active city situated 56 miles from the capital of Ukraine. At the time of the disaster, the city was highly populated. Chernobyl was the first nuclear electricity power plant in Ukraine. When the disaster happened, there were 4 reactors. Apart from that, number 5 and number 6 reactors were under construction. The explosion occurred in the number 4 reactor. What are these reactors? First, we must understand what happens within a nuclear power station. In a nuclear power plant, uranium, which is radioactive, is used as fuel to generate electricity. This is uranium. It doesn't look very dangerous in raw form, but there is a huge amount of energy stored within uranium. In order to generate electricity in a nuclear power plant, the uranium nucleus is hit with a neutron. Then the protons and neutrons of the uranium nucleus break off and create different elements. Further, 3 other neutrons are created. These 3 neutrons hit 3 uranium neutrons and create 9 neutrons. This is repeated within an unbelievably short time duration. This is just like the spread of a dangerous virus. This kind of process is called a chain reaction. This chain reaction releases the energy inside the uranium. This energy is heat and radiation. This extreme temperature is used to heat water to create steam, which rotates turbines that generate electricity. This nuclear reaction occurs within a special chamber inside the power plant. This is called the nuclear reactor. The reactor that exploded in Chernobyl is of the type RBMK. This is not a chemical reaction but a nuclear reaction. So the radiation that is emitted cannot be released to the environment. In a nuclear bomb, the immense energy within these radioactive elements is allowed to explode into the environment without control. Here too, the same high-intensity heat and radiation is released. And this energy is highly destructive. In a nuclear power plant, the most important part is that we have to use the energy within the SE radioactive elements in a controlled environment. This control is achieved through inserting boron rods into the reactor. Boron can decrease the rate of the reaction in neutrons. It absorbs the neutrons that keeps reacting with the uranium. That is why boron crystals were airdropped onto Chernobyl when it exploded. When the nuclear reaction needs to be reduced or stopped, these boron rods are lowered into the reactor. They can be lowered or lifted. When the rods are lifted, they are out of the reactor chamber. And when the rods are lowered, they are inside the chamber. The nuclear reaction is controlled by lowering or lifting these rods as needed. So these rods are called control rods. That day, these 3 people, the plant manager Viktor Brukhanov, deputy chief engineer Anatoly Stepanovich Dyatlov, and the chief engineer Nikolai Fomin, got ready to conduct an experiment on reactor number 4. But this was done in secret outside the parameters of the standard rules and regulations. The main grid controller did not agree to stop the power plant to conduct the experiment. But these 3 people decide to go ahead with the experiment while the power station is operating. There are several motors used to pump water into the reactor chamber. These motors are powered by the electricity generated in the power station. 3 diesel generators were kept as a solution if in case the turbines stopped working and the whole power station lost electricity. The electricity from these 3 generators keeps the water pumps running and cooling the reactor. But these 3 generators take a minute to power on, which means there is a lag of 1 minute when electricity is lost and the pumps are restarted. So the core gets heated for a whole minute without water. We are dealing with a nuclear reaction, where 1 minute is a very long time. This time is more than enough to overheat. But there is a solution for this as well. The turbines that shut down. Well, they do not stop at once. They slow down bit by bit and come to a halt after a considerable time. Just like when a fan is switched off, it turns slowly for a little while before stopping. The turbine that is slowing down is capable of generating a small amount of electricity for a little while longer. If this electricity can be generated, then it can be used to power the pumps for the minute until the generators start. This means the pumps will keep working continuously without stopping. This was the experiment that they did on that crucial day. However, under the influence of Dyatlov's threats, the experiment went forward in secret. A moment before the start of the experiment, Dyatlov advised to drop the power of the system to 700 megawatts. This creates a problem. Uranium is input into the reactor using fuel rods. The uranium disks are stored inside these fuel rods. When the power is down to a value like 700 megawatts, xenon gas is produced inside these fuel rods. Xenon is capable of absorbing neutrons just like boron. Under standard conditions, this xenon gas burns off as soon as it is produced. But at a low power level like 700 megawatts, the heat inside the reactor is not enough to burn off the xenon. So, xenon keeps on getting produced, and due to this the plant cannot maintain at 700 megawatts, and the power levels start decreasing. It is recorded that the power level finally dropped to 30 megawatts on that day. When this happens, the proper procedure is to shut down the reactor, and then slowly increase the power level throughout the day. But Dyatlov decides to increase the power at once. Under his orders, the boron control rods are taken out of the reactor to increase the power. From 211 control rods, 205 rods are completely taken out. According to standard international rules, at least 30 control rods should be kept inside the reactor. With rods taken out, the reaction starts to accelerate to a maximum. The core temperature increases and the xenon that was produced burns off. A defect of the RBMK reactor is that when system temperature increases, speed of the reaction also starts to increase. This is extremely dangerous. Since the pumps are turned off, there is no water in the chamber to decrease the temperature. The water remaining inside the chamber gets evaporated within seconds due to the extreme heat. Now the power of the reactor keeps increasing rapidly. There is nothing inside the core to control the heat. The reaction rate is even higher than the maximum value. In a situation like this, the only option is to shut down everything by pressing the AZ5 button. When this button is pressed, all the boron control rods completely come down, absorb all the neutrons, and stops the reaction. But this button works effectively only under standard conditions. By this point, 205 of the control rods were completely outside of the reactor. I mentioned before that these control rods are made from boron, which is capable of absorbing the neutrons and stopping the reaction. But the lowest point of these control rods were made from lead. This was done to cut down the cost. This was a fatal flaw in the RBMK design because lead is capable of accelerating the nuclear reaction speed. And now the operators press the AZ5 button, without any knowledge of the lead reaction. At once all of the 205 control rods try to descend, and the first thing to come in contact with the reaction is the lead tip and not the boron. This accelerates the reaction even more. All the control rods get stuck without being able to descend into the reactor. The fourth reactor was built to generate 3,200 megawatts. At this moment the power was rapidly exceeding this value. The power increases to 5,000, 11,000, 20,000 and finally 33,000 megawatts in an instance. At this point all the factors are present for the worst nuclear disaster in the history of the world. The temperature had reached the maximum heat that could be contained within the core. Suddenly the top cover of the core chamber blows off. The oxygen needed to increase the fire enters into the core. The date is April 26, 1986, 1:26 a.m. in Moscow time. 190 tons of uranium, enough neutrons, molten lead, and oxygen to increase the fire, all in one place. The second explosion extremely worse. But only 2 employees initially died from this explosion, others get sick from radiation poisoning. But it was only the starting point of a massive disaster that would continue far into the future. This explosion had released many times more radiation into the environment than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atom bombs. 30% of the 190 tons of the uranium in Reactor 4 had been released into the atmosphere. This poisonous cloud spread to Sweden, which was 1,500 kilometers away from Chernobyl. A helicopter that crashed into the reactor fire as it was airdropping boron to stop the fire was captured in photograph like this. In the next few days, 28 firefighters, 56 aid workers and operators add to body count. The citizens in the surrounding area did not know that they were in an extremely dangerous situation. The Soviet government kept this incident a secret to hide their weakness. The secretiveness of this situation was such that even the president of Soviet Russia at that time, Mikhail Gorbachev, got to know about it only after several days. The officials concealed the explosion and they spread the news among the citizens that it was a minor fire and that it was successfully under control. The population had no knowledge of the risk and they were being exposed to the lethal radiation. The next moment, the fire spread skywards, making it difficult to keep it hidden from the world anymore. But even then, the officials do not disclose the gravity of the situation to the public and announce that they would have to evacuate the citizens temporarily for a few days. The people leave their belongings at home and get into buses, taking only the minimum essentials with them. About 53,000 people were taken to safe locations a few kilometers away. About 10 days after the explosion, it becomes clear that this distance of a few kilometers is not safe anymore. They are again taken another 30 kilometers away. They might have never thought that they would never get to go to their homes again. About 4,000 Ukraine and Belarus citizens died from thyroid cancer. Even today, it can be seen that children with genetic disorders are born. Forests, trees, animals, everything gets polluted from radiation. The government decides to shoot the pets that were left in the homes. These animals, as well as the people who died, were sealed in concrete. An area of about 2,600 square kilometers is not suitable for living for another 3,000 years. The effects of radiation go beyond the borders of countries. It is said that this radiation affected and still affects about 75% of Europe. The collection and disposal of the debris from the explosion was done at the cost of human lives. The final stage of cleaning work at the site of the destruction, which was done within a few short months, was held in a grand way. A giant steel and concrete cover hid away the scar of the catastrophe. Even today, there are about 3.5 million Ukrainian citizens, about 5% of the population, that get special aid from the government due to various health problems caused by radiation. It is revealed that the design flaws of the RBMK-type reactors which were made in Soviet Russia, the incompliant behavior of the officials at the Chernobyl plant, the carelessness of the operators, and the inadequateness of their training were the causes of this incident. It is important to note that the government put the lives of people at a greater level of risk by not revealing the truth at the required moment. These details were found out by the physics scientist Professor Valery Legasov, who was sent by the government to investigate the explosion. His records clearly state these facts. Even though it was the truth, accepting it was considered as a disgrace by the Soviet government, who looked upon as an enemy. Yet he continuously refused to stand for a lie. Because of this, he was always chased by government spies. He was also put on house arrest. And finally, on April 27, 1988, the day of the second anniversary of the disaster, he committed suicide. Before he died, he recorded on tape and left to the world the truth that he was unable to tell while being alive. At one point on the tape, he had asked, "What is the cost of lies?"